Hello and welcome to the 12 Months to Marathon podcast with me, John Hill, the running podcast for the over 35s with Marathon Dreams, episode 58, How to Improve Your Resting Heart Rate. What's going on with me at the moment? Same as, really, as of the previous couple of weeks. So I'm currently training for High Rocks and also the Great North Run. Great North Run's in a couple of weeks. If you don't know, that's the largest half marathon in the world here in the northeast of England, and I'm looking forward to that. It's a big event, and it's one that's on the bucket list for me to do. So I'm very privileged to be able to do that, and I'm doing it raising money for Birmingham's Children's Hospital, which is a fantastic children's hospital, not too far from where I live here. High Rocks is the main goal. That's in October, and I'm ramping up my training as we speak to incorporate some different styles of training to get my body ready for that. So if you do follow me over on Instagram at 12 Months to Marathon, you'll see the journey over there. It's a good way to mix things up for me. I like to vary things up. Marathon training is great, but of course there's a lot of running involved, so with High Rocks it does mix things up a little bit. Now, I wanted to talk about resting heart rate because a few weeks ago I mentioned it in terms of rest and recovery, but I wanted to go into a bit more detail about it just because it's, pun intended, close to my heart. Because if you don't know, up until the age of 28, I was really, really unhealthy. And two things that I did. Firstly, I was overweight, and secondly, I smoked. So I wasn't really being heart friendly. Now, cardiovascular illness, as far as I'm aware, is still the world's biggest killer, premature killer. So I think looking after your resting heart rate, I do feel is important. And I think it's worth looking at both from a running point of view and also from a health point of view overall. So I'm going to talk to you about that as well. One thing that was brought to my attention a couple of years ago is just the fact that it's really good for monitoring your recovery, really, and how optimized your training levels are. Because often we think our training level optimization is how fast we're running and all that sort of business. But as I'm realizing, it's an overall approach. And a lot of the stuff that we do for comparison, social media, Strava, whatever you use, is to try and validate ourselves a lot, really. And there's a lot of bravado, and we don't need to do that, really. We need to perform, we need to achieve our results, and this will help you do that. Okay, so how to improve your resting heart rate. So it's amazing when we look at the actual average resting heart rate across the board, and then we look at our own as runners, if you do track it, of course, how good a position we're actually in, to be fair. Because the average resting heart rate for a normal adult is 60 to 100, right? 60 to 100. And I've spoken to people in the past who've had resting heart rates of 70 to 80. Okay, so 60 to 100 is normal. For most runners, it's often in the 40s, 50s or 40s, and it can be as low as 30. Now, mine, as I sit here, is 38. The lowest I've seen it is 35, which I've really been happy around. Okay, so it is worth tracking. We will caveat this, as we always do, by saying that we are relying on data here that could be, not that accurate, if I'm honest. Now, for those of you who haven't listened before, a few years ago, I did a research experiment at a university close to myself, where I did a VO2 max test and all the business. So it was on a proper treadmill with a heart rate monitor, the mask and all that. So it was the proper job. And I found that my Garmin 245 at the time, Forerunner, was quite accurate to that treadmill and those metrics. So I think this certain watches are quite close to being accurate. So they are quite a decent guide. Okay. Now, of course, you can monitor your resting heart rate manually, which I first did when I first became a fitness professional. Because when I first became a fitness professional, a few years after that, I was introduced to this concept of resting heart rate. And it made a lot of sense to me as a former smoker and somebody that was really unhealthy, because I thought, well, actually, if your heart isn't working all the time, working overtime, then surely that's a good thing. So if you've got a lower resting heart rate, first and foremost, what you have to remember is that your heart is strong. It can pump more blood, and it doesn't have to work as hard when you're resting. Now, the analogy I like to use here from a fitness standpoint is, if you imagine doing like a bicep curl with a dumbbell, right? Now, imagine doing that all day. What would eventually happen to your bicep? It would break down, yeah? So that's how I look at resting heart rate. If your heart's not working overtime all the time, then it's going to get stronger. And then obviously you build strength with it by working it occasionally. So the benefits of having a lower resting heart rate if you didn't know, we've just talked about one, which of course is your better cardiovascular efficiency, improved recovery, which I'll touch on in a second, lower stress levels, and then of course from a longevity point of view, reduced risk of heart disease and early death from heart disease, which is the world's biggest killer of people. So the lower your resting heart rate is, simply to put it in simple terms, is the better level of aerobic fitness you have. Okay. Now, what we don't want to do is we don't want to force it, okay? And we don't want it to become a comparison thing, because your resting heart rate can fluctuate based on various things: stress, sleep, caffeine, overtraining, dehydration. These are things that can contribute to it. What we should be looking at with resting heart rate is over a period of time, and we should be looking at trends, okay? Now, I've been tracking a lot of things, which is interesting for me, like I've said before, because I've never really been a data person up until I started running, interestingly. Now, what I noticed was when I was ill back in March after my marathon, when I had that epic flu, was my resting heart rate went up by nearly 10 points, 10 beats per minute, right? And I noticed a trend, and it came back down again. Now, what I've noticed over the last couple of months, whilst I've been training quite intensely but also really monitoring my recovery, is that it's fairly stable. And that's what we want. We want it to be either going down or fairly stable, yeah, if that makes sense, with minor fluctuations. But we need to track that over a period of time, because it's correlated to a lot of different factors with your training, so your recovery and also your work rate, yeah? So you've got to just be a little bit conscious of that. We don't want to be going, wait, because funny enough, I woke up a few weeks ago and my resting heart rate was 35, and that's the lowest it's ever been. That was one day. It's not been that low since. It's batting around 38 at the moment, which I'm super happy about, of course. Based on where I've come from, I'm even happier about it, because people sometimes think I'm showing off. I'm not. I'm just delighted because of where I've come from. So we need to look at it as a long-term thing, but it is definitely one, I think, to track, I think, for your recovery. Now, a good friend of mine, Jade Skilling, who's a Hyrox Master Trainer, Hyrox World Champion, she's very big on recovery, because obviously when you're training at that level, as I know at the moment, you've got to look after your recovery and your sleep, because you've got to put the work in, but you've also got to recover. And it's very similar to when you're trying to get faster over certain distances, be running. If you're doing interval training, so a lot of the work that I'm doing at the moment, like a session I did today, there's a lot of tempo, a lot of threshold work, and you've got to recover to be able to do that. So you need to be tracking your key metrics, and a good indication of whether you're rested and recovered is your resting heart rate. So how do you lower it? Well, some of this stuff will be suck eggs, I'm aware, based on people who listen to this, but it's worth going through it. So first and foremost is the foundation is always going to be, like most things, building a strong aerobic base, which comes from your slow runs, basically, and your easy conversational pace runs. Now, again, going back to speed work, I did a speed work podcast a few weeks ago, which you can check out. Let's keep it nice and simple here. Conversational pace, or easy pace for me, is 60 to 90 seconds slower, per mile or per K than your race pace, whatever your race pace is. Now, some people say that's oversimplistic. I don't think it is. Most people that I talk to are training for half marathons or further, so that's not a bad way to do it. You will know what your easy pace is. We're not going to do that today. That's something we've talked about before. But I think when you look at a standard training plan, most of your runs are going to be fairly easy for most people. I mean, even if you're doing a quite intense marathon training plan like I've done in the past, probably majority of the runs are in that easy bracket. So you need to make sure that not everything is, ground and pound, as I call it, especially in the comparison world. I see this a lot, people trying to show off, doing a run that they've said is easy when it's not really. And you know what I mean? You've just got to be careful of the comparison stuff, but make sure you build that strong aerobic base. Avoid overtraining, which I've talked about briefly. So again, going back to the bravado thing, exercise is about precision and strategy. It's not just, I'm going to run really fast all the time. And you'd be amazed how many people that I speak to on social media and in my sort of coaching stuff who just run fast all the time and don't do anything else. And I've been there myself. I've got into this habit of saying to myself, well, if it's not a certain pace, it's not a decent run. And you've just got to be careful. And that's something I've changed a lot recently as I've changed my training style when I train for different things. I realise that if I'm going for a slow run, it should just be a slow run. It doesn't have to be anything, because you're not putting this is probably a different podcast for a different day, but because that's not a purely focused run and a performance thing, it's part of the whole. It doesn't really matter. But that's an organisational thing that's part of adaptations in training plans, which is a bit more of a detailed conversation. But basically, avoid overtraining. So of course, like tomorrow for me, because I did a tempo run today, tomorrow is going to be slower. Yeah. Sleep. So monitor your sleep. We've talked about it before. You've got the sleep introduction to sleep on this podcast a few episodes ago. We've also got the detailed sleep masterclass in my 12 Months Marathon Plus podcast, which is the paid one, which is only $7 a month, and you can get tons of other resources in there. So if you want to subscribe to that, which also helps support the podcast, you can do the links in the description. But sleep, aim for 7 to 9 hours. Just to touch on that, like we did on the sleep podcast, I think for most people, if you can get 7 good hours, including a lot of REM and some deep sleep, you're okay. Obviously, the more the better. But again, go through the proper routine, check out the sleep podcast. We won't go off on that tangent again today. Manage your stress, which of course is easier said than done, but just remember with stress isn't external, it's internal. I'll give you an example. As I record this today, I was getting stressed about something earlier, but it wasn't the thing that was stressing me out. I was stressed and something came along to add to that. So stress isn't external, it's internal, and that can be managed fundamentally with some of the things we've already mentioned: sleep, but meditation, breath work, and then things like walks in nature and things like that. Meditation is very powerful. I am going to do some stuff on meditation. I've reintroduced meditation over the last 12 to 18 months after consistently doing it for a couple of years and then stopping because of falling into the trap that everybody falls in with things like that, which is this isn't working. I do 25 minutes a morning, and I highly recommend it. I think it's one of those things that adds up over time, compound effect. Hydration and nutrition. So dehydration, of course, makes your heart work harder by pumping blood, and then also having a decent diet, so an anti-inflammatory diet. Now, I have done there is an anti-inflammatory foods course in the Plus podcast, and there's also detailed stuff on nutrition in there as well, because what happens is a lot of runners just eat beige food and just think, well, I can eat what I want because I exercise a lot, but actually you need to look after your nutrition. I think having an in-depth knowledge of nutrition for myself personally has really made a difference in terms of keeping my resting heart rate low, and incorporating other training methods. So if you're doing things like cycling, swimming alongside your running, that's not overloading your running, great. And also strength training will also help as well, build a strong heart. Breathing work in the sense of at rest, yes. So working on your breathing during things like meditation and stuff like that, or your slower runs, and trying to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which you can do with breathwork. Now, breathwork's a big thing. It's not something you can cover today, but sort of practicing things like nasal breathing at rest or during slower runs can help. I've never done nasal breathing, so that was just part of the research that I did for this. But again, I think breath work and monitoring your breath is important, and there's a podcast I'll probably do on that around music and breath and how to sort all that stuff out as well. So, but yeah, just focusing on improving your breathing just in general will also help as well. So, how to track it. Most of you listening to this will have some kind of fitness tracker or watch that will track it. You could do old school with your fingers and just do it on your wrist, I guess. Or if you have got the chest strap, the proper job, then of course that will do it, because the best time to measure resting heart rate is first thing in the morning. My Garmin will normally do that for me. It gives me like a sleep score, and then I always check my resting heart rate in the morning. One of the first things I do. So I check my stats on my Garmin. I've got the 265, the Forerunner. I check my stats first thing in the morning just to make sure that everything stacks up, and then what I then do is double check my resting heart rate to see if I've recovered well enough based on that. So whilst this is just data, I like to look at the trends, like I said, and I think from resting heart rate, the big takeaway from today is always make sure that you're looking at this as a trend. You're not looking at it as a one-off, because for example, if I looked at this when I was ill, I'd have had an existential crisis, as it were. So yeah, look at it as a trend. So data, it just gives you an idea, but I think if we're tracking data and we're not emotionally attached to it and we're using it for our benefit, I think it's a good thing. So again, really important, because we're talking about numbers here with resting heart rate. It's not a bragging thing, it's not a competition thing, it's a process, and you can work it. I've worked at this now for years, since I first found out about it. I think I first found out about this 18 years ago, maybe when I first started losing weight, and just when I started getting into it. So yeah, it's one of those things that you just need to keep an eye on over time if you are tracking it. Again, remember that data is correlation, not causation. You've always got to be careful about the watch and the metrics that you're using, and then if you want to be a better runner, this is going to help you. And a lot of resting heart rate comes from actually recovery and rest. and recovery runs versus putting the work in, and it's a balancing act. And if you use that bicep analogy, it's a really good one. You'll train it for a period of time to make it grow, but then it will grow when it's healing. Yeah, and the muscles are repairing themselves, and that's the way to look at resting heart rate. So that's resting heart rate, nice and simple for you there. So I do appreciate you listening as always. Don't forget to hop over to Instagram at 12 Months to Marathon and follow me over there for all your daily contents and tips if you don't already. If you don't currently follow this podcast or subscribe to it, I really do appreciate you doing that. It helps me out a lot. The star ratings and the reviews on wherever you get your podcast from, particularly Spotify, for the sake of a few seconds, I'd really appreciate just a quick star review. That would help me out a lot. And of course, if you want to share this podcast with your friends, that would be of great help. If you go to my Instagram bio at 12 Months to Marathon, don't forget in my bio there's a link you can click and you can join my free running community for the over 35s. Totally free. It's hosted on the System School, so you can hop over there and we do some sharing and caring in there to take us away from the noise of social media and things like that. So as always, I really do appreciate you listening. Thank you so much, and I'll speak to you all very soon indeed.